know how to do them, but okay, so we're going to be talking about equations of graphs today, but for our warm-up, we're going to finish the bottom of 10b, okay? So these are the last two questions on 10b. I kind of think we might have started to talk about one of them yesterday, but I really have no idea. All right, so tell me real fast, what is this A doing right here? It's the amplitude. The B affects the period. You have to do 2 pi over B to make the period. Or if you knew the period, you'd do 2 pi over the period to get B. What is the C? Yeah, the C is the straight up phase shift. As long as you put it in this factored form, you don't have to do anything with it. And the D, vertical. Yes, the vertical shift. Good job. Okay. So what's number 5 going to say? Y equals? Okay. We don't put a 4 in there. We put what? Pi over 2 or 2 pi over 4, but I would prefer you reduced it. And then x or theta or whatever you want. Phase shift to the right 1/2 would be minus 1/2. I'm going to go with that's to the right. And vertical shift up 4 would be plus 4. Okay, who's got me on 6? Okay, then we have 2 pi divided by 3 pi over 2, which is 2. Ah, doesn't have a, okay, thanks guys, fix me. Yeah, it doesn't tell us a period change, so we're just going to go with it's 2 pi. Thank you. Questions? Okay, because that's what we're doing today, but we're going to be given a graph instead of all that lovely information. All right, we didn't talk a lot about frequency. I want to finish this up. Frequency, okay, is the number of cycles in one interval unit. So it is the reciprocal of the period. The definition of period is how long it takes to finish one cycle. Okay, and this is how many cycles in one unit. So if this was, that's supposed to say 1 right there, but it's really tiny. So if this is 1 second or whatever, the frequency would be 3 because it, 2.5? 2.5, right? 2.5, it finished in 1 second. All right, so on to this question. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically you're using a real simple sine equation. It says the frequency of the note is 262. What does that mean? The frequency is 262, then the period is what? 1 over 262. So if we want B, we have to do what? Two pi divided by 1 over 262, which is 2 pi times 262, which is where they got this lovely 524 pi, okay? And then at the end of the question, it said the amplitude is 0.2. So they stuck that 0.2 in there and got that equation. All right, so I'm on 10b. This is number 5. Guess what? The frequency is 524. So what is the period? 1 over 524. So the B value is 2 pi divided by 1 over 524, or 2 pi times what? 524 over 1, which is what? 1048 pi? Okay. Well, the frequency of a note, right? So it's going to be fast. Okay. The sound wave, basically. All right. So we have y equals what? Amplitude, good. Sine, yeah, bx. So there's one of those on the homework, and I'm guessing some of you looked at it last night and went, oh, I got to go back and read this in the book because how far didn't teach me. Well, now I kind of went over it. Better? It's not that hard, right? But I do feel bad if you tried it. I hope you went on and tried some of the graphing, because it was like the first two questions were stuff we didn't do. So that would make me want to stop. But all right, today's notes, 13A. Yeah. All right. I'm going to go over this first one without really talking about it, and then I'm going to give you some notes on how to make through, to write down about like how you would do this. But let's just try one, okay? See what we really think we already know about this. Can anybody give me where the maximum line would be? Remember, I like to do the little, this seems like it's at 3, right? The midline? Yeah, y equals 0 or the x-axis. The mins are all at -3. So what do you know? Amplitude is 3. The midline or vertical shift is basically none or 0, right? Okay. This worksheet doesn't tell us, right? We can use sine or cosine. Guys, I need to tell you, you can always use sine or cosine because it's shift of each other, right? Unless the directions tell you what you have to use. So which seems easier to use here since they don't specify? Why do you say sine? Yeah, because it seems it starts at the goes through the origin anyway, right? We shouldn't say starts. I say it all the time. All right. So are we going to need a phase shift if we use the sine? All right. The next thing we need to know is the period. How do you determine the period? Yes, full cycle ends where? Okay. So what number are we going to put into the equation? Just a 2, right? All right, so as long as we can do a sine, this seems pretty easy. Can anybody fill all that in? We decide to do a sine. That's it. It has no vertical shift or phase shift, right? And the book wouldn't bother to put those parentheses. I would prefer you put them, especially because we're going to get to some that have phase shifts and vertical shifts. All right. Guess what? Tomorrow it's going to be word problems where you have to figure out how to graph it and then how to write the equation. Ferris wheel, spring going up and down, around the equator, tides, all that kind of stuff, okay? All right. For today, given a graph, I'm just going to do something oh, I know what I can do. Sorry, got a little excited there. Let's go back and steal. Well, that one doesn't have a vertical shift. All right, I was going to steal that one and do it just because. All right, I'll make one up. If I know this point is 7, 5, this point is 7, 9, and this point is 2, 7. Okay. That's all I gave you, and it's sinusoidal. Describe for me how you find an amplitude. Yes. It's max minus min divided by 2. Yes? So, yeah, I have those backwards, don't I? The top two? Let's try that again. 5, 7, and 9, 7, and 7, 2. Yeah, I wrote them all backwards for it to make any sense at all. Okay, so over 5 up 7, over 7 up 2, over 9 up 7. This was 2 more and then 2 more. That seems okay. Whew. All right, sorry I messed that up so bad. All right, so the amplitude is really how far above and below you go from the midline. The midline seems like it should be in the middle, which seems like you should... How do you find the middle of two numbers, guys? Add and divide by 2. So we're going to do max plus min divided by 2 to find the average, which is the midline. If you find that first, then the amplitude is just how much further up or how much further down it goes from that. Okay? Are we talking y values or x values when we're doing these y values? Okay? So where is the midline on this particular one? 7 and 2, add, divide by 2, and we get 4.5. Oh, that didn't draw that straight, but anyway. Okay, 4.5. So how far above it and below it do we go? 2.5. 4.5 plus 2.5 would be 7. 4.5 minus 2.5 would be 2. Okay? Or you could have done 7 minus 2 divided by 2. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5 is our amplitude. Okay? How do you find the period? These are y values. The period has to do with what? The length of the x cycle, yes? So this has to do with an x value, and it's from one max to one max, or one min to one min, or one midline to one midline, as long as it's done the whole cycle. So if I go max to max, what is the x distance here? 4. So then I do b equals 2 pi over 4 or pi over 2. Everybody good? What shape would you easily do this one as? I would do cosine because I don't have a midline label, but I have a max label, right? My red line throwing you off because it's not in the right spot. It should be up further. I'm sorry, it's badly drawn. I would do, what? Okay. I would do that it goes from maximum to maximum, so I would call it a cosine. And then what's the shift if it's a cosine? I don't know. I could figure out maybe what it's doing back this way, but if I know right now that its first max that I have labeled is at 5, again, that's an x value. It's to the right 5, okay? All right. Anybody need to write any of that down? Okay, take a picture. We good? Now, I need you to understand there are infinite right answers for that graph. Does everyone understand that? Because it continues on and on. So I could say I could figure out where some other points are and do a sine graph. I could say it was shifted to the right 9 instead of 5, right? Because it repeats again. I could figure out points to the left and say it was shifted left. For my benefit, it's really nice if you go with the most obvious answer, okay? But if you have something else, I'll try to figure out if it's right. All right, let's try this one. Amplitude, pretty easy, because there's no vertical shift, right? So the amplitude is just 0.5. The period, well, do you want to call it sine or cosine? It looks like I would do cosine right there, right? And that means it finishes that cycle at 6 pi. So what does that make B? Okay. Do we need a phase shift? Because we said the cosine, so maximum is right here at the y-axis, so we don't need one. The midline, did that move? Just y equals 0, so you don't really need one. Okay. So anybody already do their equation? Or 0.5 cosine x over 3? Yep, either one. Just want to make sure we're comfortable that that's the same thing, because they will do it either way. Any questions? All right, does 3 get harder? A little bit. What changes? Vertical shift. Do we need a phase shift? Not if we call it what? Cosine, because again, the max to max, we can do cosine, and then we won't need a phase shift. All right, the amplitude is not 3. What do you want to do first? Honestly, I like to do the midline first, after I pick the shape. I usually pick the shape first, I don't know why. Okay, the midline, remember, is the average. It's down the middle. So if we do 3 plus -1 divided by 2, what do we get? 1. So the midline is at 1. So the vertical shift is going to be up 1. And then it's pretty easy to just figure out the amplitude is how far above or below that, which is 2. Or you could have said the max minus the min divided by 2. That would be 4 divided by 2 is 2. Everybody okay? Period. I outlined one cycle. Where did it finish? So the B value is going to be 2 pi divided by pi over 2, or 2 pi times 2 over pi, which is 4. Okay. Can anybody put that all together for me? Good. Anybody brave enough to do a sine graph out of that? Because eventually you're going to have to write both for the same graph. If I want to call this a sine graph, I have to either shift to the left or I have to call it a negative sine graph. Yes, if I want to go with the first spot there. Do you want to do negative? Does that feel better to start here? You got to go to the midline, right? The sine graph would start at the midline. Would you like to do a positive or negative sine graph? It doesn't matter. You want to do negative? Okay. So I'm going to outline it in blue. There is a negative sine graph. Oh, badly outlined. What I need to do is figure out what that quarter point is. If it finished by pi over 2, how do I find the quarter points? Which is pi over 8. So that spot right there is pi over 8, 1. So if I wanted to say it's a sine graph, everything else stays the same. It's shifted to the right, pi over 8. But if I do that, I have to remember what? Is that right? Negative. Yeah, it's flipped upside down. Otherwise, I could have said it's a sine graph that's shifted to the left, pi over 8, and I wouldn't have needed the negative, okay? All right. I'd have gone with the cosine if I had the option, but eventually I'm going to ask you to do both. Okay. You want to try this one on your own? I'll put a couple ordered pairs on here just because I think, how's that looking? Hope you see a little better. Sam P, tell me one thing. Okay. That's supposed to have a negative. Sorry, that wasn't written well. So it's shifted down to Sam D, tell me one thing. That seems true. Andrew? Okay. Reagan? 2 pi divided by 4 pi is plain old 1/2 for B. Shape and or phase shift. What do you want to go with? If we call it a sine, what does that mean? We don't. Did you just say shave fifth? No, not at all. No phase shift. Okay. So what do we end up with? Or x over 2, yep. Down 2. Everybody okay? All right. I'm not thinking this is a sine or cosine without a phase shift. I think we finally got one where we have to do a phase shift, don't you think? Okay. Well, the one with arrows is supposed to be the y-axis, and the one with arrows going this way is supposed to be the x-axis, okay? We can do a negative cosine. It's going to need a phase shift either way. I'm having a little trouble. Oh, wait a minute. Guys. Anybody figure out what the period is? I'm thinking it's 2 pi actually, because just if I shifted this over to the right one, it would be at negative pi over 2, right? If I shifted this one to the right one, it'd be at 3 pi over 2. So that is the length from negative pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2 is how far? 4 pi over 2's, yes? Because you went to 0 and then you went 3 more, so it's 4 pi over 2's, which is 2 pi. Now, we could, for fun, figure out what this is. If they're counting by pi, what? I am so confused. Doesn't that look, oh, that's, okay. This is pi over 4. This is pi over 2. This is 3 pi over 4. This is pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4. So if you counted from negative 3 to 5, how far is that? Negative 3 to 5. 8 pi over 4's would be 2 pi. Okay? So the period is 2 pi. What does that make B? Just 1. All that work. Okay, what does it appear that the maximum is at? Can we go with 5 or 6? What do you want to do? 6 makes it easier? Okay, if the maxes are at 6 and the mins are at negative 10, okay, if you average that, add and divide by 2, you'll get the midline. So it's down to, okay, which makes how far above negative 2 is 6? from -2. -2 is somewhere in here. -2 up to 6 is 8 units, and -2 down to -10 is also 8 units, yes? Or you can do the maximum minus the minimum divided by 2, right? That's the amplitude. Okay. Phase shift. What are we calling this, first of all? I don't know if I want to call it a sine because I can't tell where it crosses a midline. Can you? We might be able to figure it out. It looks like here, but if we know that this is a maximum and this is a maximum, we can do a cosine. What do you want to do? You want to say left or right shift? It doesn't matter because it repeats. Left, okay? If we say left, we'd say left how much? I labeled that. Anybody paying attention here? Okay. Okay, this is the axis, then there's 1, then there's a pi over 2. So what is halfway between 0 and pi over 2? Pi over 4. So this is a negative pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4. Okay, who's putting that together? Melanie, you put it together for me? If it's left, we actually need, there we go. And B is just 1, so we don't need another set of parentheses if we don't want to. Perfect. How are you feeling? All right. What can you tell me about this one? What? Somebody give me a couple ordered pairs. This is awful again. Is this 6 pi? Well, I think the period is 6 pi either way, because it's got 2 cycles, right? In 12 pi. Okay. The issue for me is where do we gonna? Has it got a little bit of a phase shift or not? No. Let's say no. All right. If we say the max is at 0, 10, I would give you ordered pairs, by the way, on the quiz. If we say the max is at 0, 10, where's the min at? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. All right. So where's the midline? 10 plus 4 divided by 2 is, okay. Amplitude, 10 minus 4 divided by 2. Okay. Phase shift, we decided we're going to go with none and call it a cosine. If the period is 6 pi, 2 pi divided by 6 pi is 1/3. So Ian, put it all together for me. Okay. I'm not sure that's exactly what they wanted, but we're going to go with it. Okay, this one is a word problem. I'd kind of like to talk about where these numbers come from because, well, maybe not. Maybe they don't even give us much. But eventually, the things we would know about this Ferris wheel. You paying attention, guys? The lowest it ever goes is 5 feet. Okay. which is going to be true of a Ferris wheel. It's not going to hit the ground, right? The highest it goes is 35 feet. Can anybody tell me what that means about the Ferris wheel? Okay, if you were 5 feet off the ground and the highest it goes is 35, what do you know? No, it's not 40 feet because it says 35. The diameter is what? 30 feet, and the radius is, anybody know what else the radius is? Or what else is true about that number 15? It is the amplitude. Because the radius tells you how far above and below the midline you go, right? We can find the midline by averaging these. What's 5 plus 35 divided by 2? 20. And how far above 20 did it go? And below? So that's the amplitude, okay? So let me write down. Amplitude is radius, by the way, which is 15. It's actually meters, not feet, which is a ridiculously large Ferris wheel. Okay. The period. Can we do the period? How long till it finishes? Yikes. All right. This is, guys, got to do a little work. This is definitely not on a particular spot, but this one is. So it takes 3.5 minutes to do what? 2 rotations. So if we divide that, we get what? Does that seem right? Does it look like it's halfway between 1.5 and 2 right there? Okay. So the period is 1.75 minutes. What does that mean goes into the equation? Two pi divided by 1.75. And I would be okay if you left that. Or if you do 2 divided by 1.75 math, enter, what nice number do you get? 8 over 7, 8 pi over 7. I would accept either one, okay? Normally that's not good notation because you've got a decimal and a fraction, but because it's an application that it makes sense for, I would be all right. Okay. So you want to use a sine graph? Maybe a negative cosine because it starts at the min. Okay. So negative amplitude 15 cosine B value. Yeah, I don't have a lot of room, so I'm going to write it in that form. Do we need a phase shift? No, because we did negative cosine, right? And then the vertical shift. Yep, the midline here we already figured out was at 20. Okay. Do you want to find the angular and linear velocity? No. Okay, just checking. How would we put this in our calculator to check that our equation works? That's what I've been wanting to do with one. You type this equation in your calculator. What mode do we have to be in? Yes, any kind of graphing of trig functions, you are in radians. We just wrote that equation in radians. By the way, I need to turn my stat plot off, otherwise it's going to be trouble. So it's negative 15 cosine parenthesis 8. I'm going to put an extra parenthesis there. 8 pi over 7. Close parenthesis, and then I'm going to put my x, and then close all that, plus 20. I just want the x to be on the top, not on the bottom with the 7, which I think it would be, but it kind of confuses me. So, all right, what kind of a window do I want? Look at the graph. What does the graph have for a window? Zero to 10 across, and counting by actually 0.5s if you wanted to be. I don't really care about the scale. And up and down, 0 to What'd you just tell me? 40 counting by fives? Good. Should look exactly like theirs. I used their scale. I counted this by 0.5s and this by 5, but it doesn't, the scale isn't really that big of a deal. How would you check? So could you say, well, let's see, at 3.5, it was at 5 feet, right? So if I type in trace 3.5, I should be at 5 feet, and I am. So now if I asked you, where were you 3.5 minutes in, or let's say 5 minutes into this ride, how high up are you? You just go trace 5, I got 10.6 feet, yes? Okay. All right, moving on to one more. Oh, then we do have some angular and linear velocity fun. All right. How do we put this in our calculator? Oh, be careful. Cost of natural gas in an Oregon home. I think in order to make this work, we probably need to call this month 1.
All right.
Because otherwise it's going to move these points, and I think this makes more sense. So we're going to say X equals 1 is August. So X is number of months past August. Just so we know, okay? And we're going to put them in. Was it 12, guys? So I don't have to change my numbers for those. It went 1 through 12. Oh, these are even awful numbers to type in. Why couldn't they just round it to the nearest dollar? Please be doing this so that you're ready for the quiz on, we don't have to practice this a million times. I feel like we've done so much regression stuff that you should know where the buttons are. All right, it's taking me forever to type these in. All right, I hope I have them typed in right. Now what do I do? Okay, I am going to just calculate and write it down in a second, but I'm going to turn my stat plot on because I really want to know if this looks like a sine graph, and then I'm going to do, take out anything that's in y equals, and take out, and do a zoom 9. Oh yeah, that looks definitely periodic, right? All right, so then I'm going to go do what you said, which was stat right arrow down to what? Sine regression. And all I want to do is make sure I tell it to store it in Y1. The rest of it I don't care about. And please, guys, make sure you use the model there at the top. It has the B inside the parenthesis, okay? 46.76 sine 0.52 x minus 2.09 plus 68.73. Did I remember what that said right? Did someone else get those numbers? It's 7.4. Okay. Does it ask us to predict anything? This one doesn't? Okay. All right, finishing strong. Maury pulls a cord on his lawnmower to start it. In order for the engine to start, the pulley must turn 150 revolutions per minute. What is that? Is that an angular velocity? No, because it has to be in what? Radians. So 1 revolution is 2 pi radians. Now I'm down to radians per minute, but they ask for an angular velocity that's in what? Radians per second, so I still got to do 1 minute is 60 seconds. Okay, so 15 times 2 divided by 60 is half, right? So you could say pi over 2, or if you type it all in, 15 times 2 pi divided by 60, 1.57? Oh, that's a 0? I can read. Okay, so then it's 5 pi, right? If you type it in 15.7, anybody? Radians per second. Okay. How do you change to linear that says the pulley has a radius of 0.24 feet? Once you know angular, all you have to do is multiply by the radius, right? So 15.7 or 5 pi radians per second times 0.24 feet will give me feet per second. I got 3.8 if I round to the nearest tenth. 3.77 is a beautiful thing. Yeah, I don't know what it comes out if you leave it in pi, but anyway. All right, guys. Worksheet 14B. There's 9 problems picked out on here, okay? 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 10, 11, and 14. You can do all of them for extra practice.